Welcome everyone. My name is Julia Armstrong. I'm Deputy Head Academic at Kellett School here in Hong Kong, the same city as Cal, but I'm also Chair of the Fabisia CPD Executive Committee. It is my absolute pleasure today to open the webinar as part of the Fabisia Fellowship Series for this academic year. For those of you that don't know, the Fellowship is one of those initiatives that really makes a difference, not just to individual fellows, but also to their schools, their students, and of course the wider Fabisia network. The Fellowship Programme provides high potential middle leaders with an opportunity and, more importantly, a platform to share evidence-informed school-based action research projects. Today, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Bowness, who's a phase leader and curriculum coordinator at Shrewsbury, I'm going to say that right, International School, Hong Kong. Cal will be sharing his work titled Talk to Learn, Learn to Talk, equipping students with oracy for life through cooperative learning. In this session today, Cal will explore how structured talk can be deliberately designed to improve participation, deepen thinking, and enhance learning for all students. He will share practical classroom-ready approaches to cooperative learning that support both individual accountability and equal participation. He will also be considering how carefully structured talk routines can move beyond surface level discussion to ensure that every learner is actively thinking, listening and contributing, something that will resonate strongly across all of our contexts. I know today you're going to gain some really valuable insights into how embedding how we can embed talk routines into our classrooms. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Cal. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, and a huge honour to be here. Thank you to Julia and to Swati. I was speaking to them just before we started the session, just to say how valuable this fellowship has really been for both Shrewsbury as a school and myself personally, and I'll touch on that a little bit more towards the end of the session. But I want to get stuck straight in to what you're here for today. And prior to introducing the topic, I will introduce myself. So, as Julia said, Bowness, Shrewsbury International School, Hong Kong. I lead Year 3 and Year 4 as a phase, and also look after our curriculum. And I've worn many hats since being here over the 4 years. Prior to that, I spent 8 years in the UK as a senior leader. And today is for me to share our journey with this so far. And it's not a finished piece of work by any means, more of an evolving inquiry into participation, into voice and classroom culture. Now, the title Talk to Learn, Learn to Talk, equipping students with oracy for life through cooperative learning. Today's session will focus quite significantly on the cooperative learning portion of that. Now, before changing practice, I really wanted to understand what others were experiencing in our school and whether or not that was also something that they felt was an area that we needed to focus on, both oracy in classrooms and across our school. And our vision was to build a real culture of purposeful communication across Shrewsbury. And my aim through this project was to contribute a model that the wider Fabisia community could really adapt to strengthen oracy within their own multilingual settings. So I hope that this webinar and the work that I've done can spark discussion within your setting, and you can dig a little bit deeper into it as a school. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, wearing many hats in my 4 years here, whether that was across mathematics, across oracy, as a phase leader, or of course curriculum. And in those, wearing those hats, I've had the opportunity, of course, to go and conduct a number of learning walks across a number of years. And there was one pattern that I felt kept appearing, and it was that classrooms were full of talk, and I'm sure all of the participants, yourself sat here today, colleagues, will say, of course our classrooms are full of talk. It's happening day in, day out, every single lesson. But the pattern that I felt that I was seeing was that it wasn't the kind of talk that was really building oracy. So unstructured talk, hearing from the few, not the many, and talk that lacked purpose, equity, and depth. I just wasn't seeing it. And I think from the outside, and even sometimes spending time inside classrooms, sure, it looked like there was lots of learning taking place, lots of talk. But if you were to unpick that and dig a little bit deeper, you would see this was happening, this was taking place. Now, as I continued to think about this, I started to realize that it wasn't a reflection of student ability, it was a reflection of student opportunity. And we wanted to ensure that participation from students wasn't just left to chance. And that got me thinking about a piece that I read, I think this was way back in 2022, by Tom Sherrington. And I'm just going to read this to you, just so you can hear it out loud. So this was what he had to say on participation. At the most basic practical level, the least confident students need to be involved in thinking, talking, practicing, puzzling things out, making connections, rehearsing. And for many teachers, this is an area to work on. It's all too common for lessons to revolve around the contributions of that top third. They do the most of the talking. The teachers can take their cues from a small sample of those most confident students. And it means that the least confident students can sometimes do no talking or deep thinking at all. Now, some of the practical considerations that Tom Sherrington put forward were using a strong repertoire of inclusive questioning techniques, thinking time and rehearsal, making sure group tasks or paired talk didn't just serve as a masking agent for people to hide behind, and scaffolding, so thinking about sentence starters and rehearsed phrases. And this, not just this piece of research, but this made me realise this is something that's been happening within education for an incredibly long time. And a lot of you sat here will think, yeah, this is nothing new. And I totally agree with you, it's nothing new. But I think it's something that's overlooked, and it's something that isn't focused upon enough within our teaching practice and within our schools. Because as I say, it's very easy to look into classrooms and spend time and think that there is talk and think that there is learning happening. But how sure can you really be if there isn't that structure in place? So, what I did, I thought, right, before I speak to staff, I need to speak to our students. I need to get the evidence that I think is there, and then I need to try to get staff buy-in, right? Because without having, you can't have a positive impact if you don't have people on board. And I didn't want staff to think that it was a direct attack on them and their teaching. That's not what I was aiming to do. I was aiming to just raise awareness and highlight an area that, as a school, we can really improve on. So these are the headlines that came back in July 2025, when I carried out a series of focus groups and some surveys with our students. So only 50% of them felt that they had enough thinking time before speaking. 50% felt that they were able to contribute regularly. So again, that's only half of the students spoken to. 70% of students reported that they were interrupted during their discussions that were taking place. And this was the one that I think I found most shocking. I'm using that word deliberately. 45% of students worried about getting things wrong when sharing an answer. So you're probably sat there thinking, great, there's the data, what are you going to do with it? So we transform the talk that's happening in our classrooms by designing it. I mentioned this previously, and not just leaving it to chance. So what we looked to embed were clear roles and responsibilities, built-in thinking time, and to many, thinking time, people will say, I give my students thinking time, but how often will you look or be in a lesson and you'll hear the phrase, talk to the person next to you? Now, that's a great phrase, but there is no structure to it. And how can you guarantee that there's any individual accountability, equal participation, simultaneous interaction taking place? That's what then led to me thinking about having structured turn-taking, purposeful partner work, and of course teacher-led modelling of these routines. So when you strip that back, those 5 bullet points that I've just read to you, they're incredibly simple, right? And you will think, well, they're kind of the bare bones of our teacher training, but they can be often overlooked. And if you were to dig a little bit deeper into teaching and learning within your settings, I'm sure you would see that there is room for improvement, as of course there is in all areas. But this in particular has really got the potential to enhance significant growth within classrooms. As well as this, what we were going to get students to do, we want them to think clearly, we want them to speak confidently, and of course collaborate purposefully, because these areas are not just for our classrooms, this is for their later life, this is for their career, this is for their interviews that they will have. All aspects of life, you want to have these skills. It's the fundamental. Without these skills, our students are not going to access mathematics, English, science, even the arts. They're not going to be able to access them with the potential that they could have. So we wanted students to participate equitably, not passively, reflect on their thinking, not just share answers, grow in confidence, because we want every voice to be heard, and engage deeply. And I put here because the structures demand it. So I've taken you through my why, or our why, our how, and our what. But again, you might be thinking, well, let's dig a little bit deeper. What did you actually do? So again, looking at this table, incredibly simple. So I think pair share. So before taking responses, students routinely giving that thinking time and the opportunity to rehearse before then sharing it with a peer. A timed pair share. So both students are speaking for an allocated amount of time rather than one student dominating. A round robin, so every student within a group contributing to a discussion. A rally robin, so this was quite a quick retrieval vocabulary exercise, idea generating between 2 students, quite quick fire. Now, I also, this last one I'm going to have to talk about, the stand-up, hand-up, pair-up. This is one of my favourites. So giving students the opportunity not just to share ideas with the person that they're sat next to, but they get to, it's almost like waking your brain up a little bit, standing up, moving around the room, and sharing your ideas with other students. Now, these structures can have a number of different names, and we're not stuck, we're not bound to these structures only. A school could use completely different structures and still achieve the exact same outcomes as long as the principles are present. And I mentioned these principles earlier, and if we take the acronym PIES, positive interdependence, so working as part of a team and needing your team in order to succeed. Individual accountability, knowing that the teacher has asked a question and I have to think of an answer. I have to come up with an idea ready to share potentially. Equal participation, and of course simultaneous interaction. Those fundamentals are going to be key. So what we didn't anticipate, and I'm sure lots of you will have these thoughts going around in your mind now. So our EAL learners with little or sometimes no English in some cases, students withdrawn if they've gone to interventions, high attaining students getting frustrated by quieter partners, some of our specialist teachers who are working without maybe the fixed teams that have been created in classrooms, and of course our EYFS team and needing that greater flexibility when working at that end of the school. But something that I kept reiterating to our team here during staff training was that implementation was not about applying structures perfectly. It was about adapting the principles intelligently when we needed to. So 5 lessons that I drew from what we were implementing. And before I talk about these 5 lessons, I think it's important for me to say that this initiative, as a result of the student surveys, focus groups, and also staff surveys and focus groups, it was quite clear that we needed some professional development around this topic. So there have been so far 4 training sessions that I have led on this topic across this academic year. And those sessions have gone from introducing the structures, implementing a selection of the structures, reviewing and refining those structures, and then, as you can see from these 5 lessons, thinking about how we can continue to adapt and make these structures work across our school. Because it's not a case of these structures not working. It's a case of principles over perfection, which is what I'm going to keep reiterating to you across these 5 lessons. So in our classrooms, our student participation, flexible, scaffolded, inclusive, accountable, and deliberately designed. Because what I found in our school was that they were not always deliberately designed. They were there, they were present. But because they were not deliberately designed, because they were not attached to maybe the key questions that were being asked, we weren't seeing the participation that I believe truly could have allowed our students to flourish. Okay, so lesson number 1. Participation does not need to sound fluent. And this was one that quite quickly became apparent to me, because you are going to get students who are quieter, students who are shy, students with EAL, people who are not going to necessarily be, and I'm sure you've already got students popping up in your mind right now, potentially in your classrooms, in your schools, and you're thinking this would be a struggle for them. But repeating a key phrase that is said to them, using sentence stems, rehearsing with that partner, even responding using visuals. And something that I haven't put on here, if needed, responding in their mother tongue, in their first language. Because essentially what we are trying to do is improve the oracy skills of our students. And what we don't want to do is create any barriers. So each of these options are perfectly viable. And then, of course, as we develop and as we grow, we're looking to improve those, and we're looking to see an improvement in those contributions throughout the academic year. Lesson number 2. So adapting the structure and not the expectation. When we put that expectation in our classrooms that every student needs to think, every student needs to compose an idea, and every student needs to be willing to share that, whether that's with the person next to them, whether that's out loud, whether that's in a small group, and of course eventually whether that's to the whole class. That is the expectation, and that's for all. Now, trios replacing pairs. We were finding that classrooms, of course, do not have an even number of students in them. So we're not always going to have pairs. We're also going to have interventions that are being run. So students are being taken out, or for example, music lessons, whatever it might be. So rather than being so rigid, we can have trios. So we can have one person listening, one person speaking, and that third person can be a summarizer, take on the summarizer role, so that two people will have spoken. Yes, one may not have contributed, but their job is to summarize that conversation and what's been said. And of course, that was just one occasion. On the next occasion, the person who is the summarizer would not be the summarizer again. They would be the person that would speak, and the roles would change within that trio. Partner rotation. Now, I've included this one as well as flexible grouping, because we can't always rigidly pair students together for a prolonged period of time. It doesn't always work like that. And depending on what part of the school that you're in, there needs to be some fluidity to it. So again, that's totally fine. Now, I currently work in a Year 4 classroom, and in my classroom, I do have quite a rigid seated plan at times. And that seating plan will change half-termly, with the aim being that every student will have worked with every student by the end of the year. And they are sat purposefully on their tables with a set role. And I'm not going to dig into that right now in the session, but if you do have any questions on the way I approach it in my classroom, then of course I'd love to speak to you. So you can please reach out towards the end of the session, and we can touch base on how that works in the classrooms here at Shrewsbury. Lesson number 3. So support the quiet and stretch the confident. And I touched on this earlier. So using things like sentence stems, of course, thinking time, and rehearsal is just an absolute key cornerstone to ensuring that students are being given the time in order to be confident enough to share. And again, all of these things seem fairly obvious, right? But when you actually strip it back, and again, when you actually dig a little bit deeper, ask your students, just as I did, like, do you have enough thinking time? And just see what the response is. Because I was pleasantly surprised with the first set of data that we received, because although I had an inkling, I did not anticipate that 50% of our students would tell me that. And of course, the last point there, coaching stronger students to facilitate rather than dominate. And that's been quite a journey for some of my Year 4s this year in particular. Incredibly academic students who know they're academic, who found it difficult taking on that coaching role because a lot of the students were quite competitive and wanting to showcase to me that they knew exactly what they were doing. They had finished. And you'll know the students that I'm talking about. You can picture them in your mind. So trying to shift that mindset and get them to understand that by coaching others next to them or around them, that is going to significantly support them, both academically and, of course, socially. Okay, now, this is one of my favourites, the time question. And this came up a lot from staff, and you know what? I totally understand why. Because one of the most common questions you will have as a teacher is, I've got a curriculum to teach, and I've got lessons to move forward, and this is essentially going to hold me up at times. I'm not going to quite get it right, and I'm not going to keep the pace that I need in order to keep my students on board. But one thing that I fed back to staff during our CPD was, yes, it's quicker to take one answer, but we need to ask quicker for what? Because it's quicker to move the lesson on, for sure, but is it really more effective for learning? And of course, it will tell you who knows, but 30 seconds here and a minute there, yes, that adds up, but you're hearing from the few, not the many. And by doing that, that time that I'm talking about with a 30-second structured partner talk, that's going to significantly help you without having to reteach a topic, disengagement among students, who are not needing to think. They're able to just sit and coast because no one is really asking of them. And a shallow understanding. That's another phrase that I coined with our staff, that with that shallow understanding, we're not always noticing it because, again, we're not asking all of our students to engage. There's not that expectation there. And of course, hands up tells us who knows. But by allowing everyone to talk, that's ensuring everyone is thinking at a minimum. Now, participation is only the beginning, and this is something that I found. We set up the structures, and across learning walks, I was so impressed and, I'll be honest, pleasantly surprised with the success that I was seeing. But the problems that I was then noticing, and let's not call it a problem, it's part of the learning journey, but once students were speaking, was there always the quality there? And I've put here to explain, justify, build, and challenge. And I've actually got a card here, and I think Mia may be on this call from Shrewsbury City Campus over in Bangkok. We got together to have a conversation around this topic, and she actually showed me a tool that she's been using in her classroom, and it's just a prompt card, and it says giving a new opinion with some sentence stems, agreeing with some sentence stems, building with some sentence stems, and then challenge with some sentence stems. So depending on what the student wants to do in response to their partner, they can, I agree with you because, further to your point, I would like to add, I disagree with you. I would like to challenge you. And I was blown away at the impact that these have had, because when you enter a classroom and you hear students using these sentence stems, and then ingrained in their minds that they don't even use the cards anymore and they're just using them freely, it's quite remarkable. And the amount of quality that then comes from those discussions is fantastic. And what teachers found is that with these simple tools, with these simple structures, it's not additional workload, it's not an additional lesson to teach. These are tools that you have in your toolkit, and you're using them every single lesson. It doesn't matter what lesson you're in, these are being used all of the time. And what we're then seeing are patterns forming across classrooms and quality talk developing again across classrooms and across phases. So, as a summary of the challenges, things that we had to adapt and things that we had to think about: sentence stems, responding with visuals, thinking time and rehearsals, being able to adapt that structure into a trio, summarize a role, ensuring that there was structured accountability. So, for example, in my class, I've got someone who is incredibly shy, and even their friends would know them as someone who was a shy individual. But the expectation was there that you cannot just sit and coast. You cannot just sit and not say anything. Even if you provide a visual on a whiteboard that you show your partner, that is participation. And as long as that is there, you will start to see growth within those students. And you can see here, the time concerns, it's just about short, purposeful exchanges. So, the headline data from July over to May this year. So, thinking about the noticeable differences, you can see them here. Well, I will read them to you. After a year, or just short of a year, 72% feel that they have enough thinking time. 90% felt that they were able to contribute regularly. 83% of our students report uninterrupted talk time, and 12% worry about getting things wrong. And of course, you can see from that data, there's still room for improvement. Of course there is. But the actual difference there is huge, and something that I, the middle leadership team and senior leadership team here have celebrated, because look at that difference. So, 3 headline statements. More students are thinking, more students are contributing, and more students feel safe to do so. And I can honestly sit here and tell you that is happening, and incredibly proud to say so, because small tweaks, small changes, some real focused CPD has not only improved pedagogy and teaching practice, it's really, really improved the outcomes for our students within classroom talk. And here's some quotes, some ones that I really felt like I had to share. Saying my ideas to my partner and getting their opinion first so I can be confident if my idea is good. When we talk to our partners, I get more ideas. I think it's helpful. The teacher lets us talk to our partner or sometimes our table, and it makes me feel much more confident when asked to share. I have more time to think about my answer before sharing. The thing that helps me in class is when my partner actively listens and smiles when we thank one another. And you might think to yourself, a child rarely said actively listens, but they are. They're using this terminology. And the reason that they're using this terminology is because it's being used and modelled by teachers in classrooms. And the expectation is you are going to actively listen to your partner. You are going to look at them in the eyes. You are going to nod as they're speaking to show that you're listening and to show whether you're agreeing with them. Just these small little tweaks, as I said earlier, are having huge impact. Now, beyond Shrewsbury, and this is something again that I feel very privileged to have been given this fellowship this year, because both as a school here at Shrewsbury and also as a personal, something personal to me, been able to go to the Fabisia Leadership Conference back in November and speak in front of what was, Julia will understand, quite a large audience full of senior leaders, principals, head teachers. Quite a daunting task, but something that was incredible, really was. And to see the interest that it spiked and the discussions that were had, it made me realise that this is not a topic that is present here at Shrewsbury. This is something that schools across our Fabisia community are interested in. And as a result of that, I have linked up with a number of colleagues across the Fabisia region, across Asia, even as far as the UK, with a university who are looking to really focus on this with some of their teacher training program. Of course, the Fabisia publication, you can see a little snippet of this here. I probably should have linked that so you could read it, but I'm sure if you go and have a look at the Fabisia LinkedIn page, you will find this. A short summary of the journey, and again, a pleasure to be a part of the 50th edition of that. Cross-school collaboration, so being able to physically go and see other schools as a result of this project and share the good practice that is taking place here, and also learning from other schools what they are doing for oracy in their settings. It's been fantastic, and of course the professional dialogue that is also taking place. Now, this work became bigger than oracy, and what I mean by that, I'm talking about inclusion, I'm talking about belonging of our students, safeguarding and student agency. And our vice principal here at Shrewsbury, Hong Kong, Emma Sutton, I know she's on the call, actually took this as inspiration for her keynote that she led at the recent Fabisia Safeguarding Conference, which was over at Kellett. And it was a topic that really supported what she did when her title actually was Oracy as a Tool for Empowering Voices and Student Support. And I think a lot of the things that I've spoken about today have a direct impact on that topic. And it was something that Emma was able to share when she was over at the Safeguarding Conference. A headline here, 3 headline sentences. Participation must be designed. Equity requires structure. Refinement never stops. And I will stand by that point, and I will continue to say, like I said at the start of this, we are nowhere near the finished article here. We're not done. We've just scratched the surface with this, and I'm incredibly excited because when participation is designed deliberately, more students think, and more students contribute, and more students belong. And I'm incredibly excited to see where this project takes us in the next academic year, and also the work that will be done across Fabisia with this. A huge thank you. Special shout outs from me, and I know that a number of the people that I'm speaking to here are on the call, so a huge thank you not only to Emma Sutton, who is our Vice Principal here, who I've worked very closely with on this topic, the staff here at Shrewsbury, the students here, Nick, I know Nick's also on the call over at Dulwich in Singapore. A huge thank you to him as my mentor for all of the guidance he's given me. Nick, you were incredibly supportive when I was preparing for my presentation back at the leadership conference, and you gave up a lot of your time, so a huge thank you. And of course to Fabisia, because without you I would not have had this opportunity, and of course without you this project wouldn't have been able to thrive, so a huge thank you from me.
Great, thank you so much, Cal. I've been frantically scribbling everything down as you were speaking there, and I really like the kind of 5 lessons that you shared throughout that. Particularly number 1, participation doesn't need to sound fluent. I think sometimes even as adults we are our own kind of worst enemies, and we think that we have to speak so eloquently all the time, and that's not necessarily what real talk is like. And I think for our students to take that pressure off them and just to get them to engage with the process of speaking to each other, adapt the structure, not the expectation. Number 3, we're both based in Hong Kong, and we'll know from the students that we teach, some of them are incredibly quiet. So being able to support the quiet but stretch the confident, and for them to support each other in that as well. The timed question I love. I'm very guilty of that as a classroom teacher, kind of almost demanding immediate responses, but just pausing to give students that 30 seconds of structured partner talk is definitely something I will take away from this. And as you've mentioned many times, participation is only the beginning. Where can we kind of push this next? So Cal, I just want to say a huge thank you. I'm just checking the chat and the Q&A. We do have one question. She said, how will you support students who struggle with expressing their ideas? I don't know if you can just elaborate a little bit more on how you might do that.
For sure. And I think it's something that I've seen more frequently than what I thought. I didn't think it was going to be as big of an area that started to develop even here at Shrewsbury. So as I mentioned previously, allowing students to use visuals, providing students essentially with all of the tools that they may need in order to contribute. So whether that be sentence stems, even here at Shrewsbury, we've been looking particularly across year 3 and 4 at the moment, looking at how with some of our bilingual students, how they don't always have to contribute using English. If their best means of communication is to go back to their mother tongue, which here would be Chinese, that's also okay, because we're building the foundations of speaking and listening, and the foundations of speaking and listening is speaking, right? Now, it might not be in English at the moment, but that's the project, that's the aim. And if somebody's an incredibly reluctant speaker because of EAL as an example, then let's not inhibit that. Let's give them the freedom to still communicate. But I think a lot of the work that I've also started to move into is pre-learning as well. So with some of my students who I know struggle for ideas or who I know are reluctant, there will be some pre-learning that will happen with a small selection of students that's given them a bit more of a grounding in what we're going to be talking about. So they're not coming into the session with nothing. They're coming in with at least a fair idea, and that's been very important so far. But as I said, we are at the very beginning of our journey. I think we're just scratching the surface. A lot of work has gone and taken place, but of course, room to improve.
Great, thank you for that. I'm just going to quickly jump over to the chat. Maybe more of a comment here from Callie. She's just saying, thank you, Cal. And we've recently done a Power Hour CPD session on getting students to think out loud. So she's been really reassured to hear that other schools are facing the similar issues that have led to that particular session. And as you've mentioned, Cal, I think this is where we can really harness the Fabicia network. I would say, Callie, if you're happy to reach out to Cal, I think your email address is on the screen. Sure. I'm pretty sure Cal would be happy to kind of share Julia, further ideas.
That's really interesting that Callie said that, as that's something that with our EY students, because of course, I'm very Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 minded. EY for me is sometimes can be slightly alien, I'll be really honest. And I love going down there, and having spent a lot of time down there with this project, I started to realize that even thinking time for EY students is different. They think out loud, and that's absolutely fine. And Callie's touching on that there with that CPD session, like allowing our EY students to think out loud, and also starting to filter in some sentence stems even with EY students. Again, that expectation. And recently I went to spend some time down with our EY2 students, and I was with a group of boys. They were using the blocks, and they were building this incredible structure, and lots of them were using this phrase. They would say something and then they'd say, but what do you think? So what do you think? And it was incredible. It really was, to see already starting to pick up these sentence stems, and it was driving their conversations.
Great, thank you. And thank you everyone who's still on the call. It's been really, really lovely to hear some of the messages or see some of the messages come through for Cal. And as I say, he's very, very willing to any emails that you send over to answer your questions. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.